Good evening, everyone. Let us begin by understanding what Constitution of India truly represents. The Constitution is the supreme law of India. It is the highest legal authority in the country and no law or action can go against it. It was adopted on 26 November 1948 after extensive debates and discussions by the Constituent Assembly. However, it came into force on 26 January 1950, a date which we now celebrate as the Republic Day. Now, one very important point to understand here is that the Constitution is the source of legal authority in India. What does it mean? It means that every law that is made, whether by the Parliament or by any state legislature, must derive its validity from the Constitution. If any law goes against the provisions of the Constitution, it can be declared invalid or unconstitutional by the courts. So, in essence, the Constitution acts as the ultimate benchmark against which all laws and actions are tested. Keep this key area in your mind as we move forward. Now, every law in India derives its validity from the Constitution. Before we understand the Constitution in its present form, it is important to take a quick look at its historical background. India's constitution development did not begin in the year 1950. In fact, it evolved gradually over a long period during the British rule itself. One of the earliest steps in this direction was the Regulating Act of 1773. This act marked the beginning of centralized administration in India. It was first attempt by the British Parliament to regulate the affairs of the East India Company and bring some structure to the governance. Moving forward, one of the most significant legislations was the Government of India Act 1935. This act is often referred to as the blueprint of the present constitution. Many features that we see today have their roots, such as federal structure, distribution of powers, and administrative framework in this act. Finally, the Indian Independence Act of 1947 provided the legal foundation for India to keep the frame of its own constitution. It ended the British rule and gave the Constituent Assembly the authority to draft and adopt a constitution for an independent India. So, if we look at it more closely, our constitution is not something that emerged overnight. It is a result of continuous process of legal and administrative evolution. And an important insight that you need to remember here is the Government of India Act 1935 played a crucial role in shaping the federal structure and administrative framework that we follow even today. Now let's move on to the Constituent Assembly, which is the body which was responsible for drafting the Constitution of India. The Constituent Assembly consisted of representatives from different parts of the country, reflecting the diversity of India. Initially, it had a total of 389 members, although this number was later reduced after the partition of India. One of the most important components of the assembly was the drafting committee, which was chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. His contribution was instrumental and he is rightly regarded as the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. Now it is important to appreciate the effort that went into drafting this document. The Constituent Assembly took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to complete the Constitution. This reflects the depth of discussions, debates, and careful consideration of various perspectives before finalizing each provision. From a legal standpoint, the work of Constituent Assembly continues to hold relevance even today. In the landmark case of Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, the Supreme Court emphasized the vision and intent of the framers of constitution are crucial in interpreting its provisions. This means while the Constitution is a living document, its foundational philosophy is shaped by the Constitutional Assembly, which remains central to the constitutional interpretation even today. Now, let us look at some of the key features of the Constitution of India. To begin with, it is one of the lengthiest written constitution in the world. This is largely because India is extremely diverse country and the constitution attempts to address this diversity by providing detailed provision on governance, rights and administration. Another important feature is that India follows a federal system with a unitary bias. This means while powers are distributed between central and states, the constitution gives stronger powers to the center, especially during emergencies to maintain unity and integrity. We also have a parliamentary system of government where the executive is accountable to the legislature. In simple terms, the government is responsible to the parliament and it must function within its confidence. The constitution also declares India to be sovereign and secular. Sovereign means that India is independent and not subject to any external authority. Secular means that the state does not favor any particular religion and treats all religions equally. Another crucial feature is the presence of independent judiciary. The judiciary acts as a guardian of the constitution and ensures that the laws and actions remain within the constitutional limits. Now let's see from the legal perspective. One landmark case that highlights the importance of these features is S.R. Bommai versus Union of India. In this case, the Supreme Court held that secularism is a part of the basic structure of the Constitution. This means that even Parliament cannot amend the Constitution in a way that it destroys the secular character. So these features are not something that's just descriptive. They form the very foundation of our constitutional framework and are protected at the highest level. Now let's move ahead with the preamble of the Constitution, which is often described as the soul or the guiding spirit of the entire document. The preamble reflects the objectivity and philosophy of the Constitution. It tells us what the framers intended to achieve and the kind of society they envisioned for India. It begins with the words, "We, the people of India," which clearly establishes that the ultimate authority lies with the people. The preamble itself is built around four key details: justice, which includes social, economic, political justice. This ensures fairness in all aspects of life. Liberty, which guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, belief, and worship. Equality, which ensures equal status and equal opportunity for all citizens without discrimination. And finally, fraternity, which promotes a sense of brotherhood, unity, integrity among all the citizens of the country. Together, these values form the foundation of our democratic system and guide the interpretation of the Constitution. So, whenever there is any ambiguity in understanding a constitutional provision, the preamble acts as a key to understanding the intent behind it. Let's move ahead from preamble of the Constitution, which is often described as the soul, to the freedom or the basic fundamental right. Fundamental rights are contained in Article 12 to 35, and they are very essential for the development of an individual's personality and dignity. Now, these rights protect citizens against arbitrary actions of the state and ensure a framework of liberty and equality. There are several categories of fundamental rights. First, right to equality, which is covered under Article 14 to 18. This ensures equality before the law, prohibits discrimination on grounds such as religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Second is the right to freedom, which comes under Article 19 to 22. This freedom include such as freedom of speech, expression, assembly, association, movement, residence, profession, etc. Then we have right against exploitation, which prohibits practices such as human trafficking and forced labor. The Constitution also guarantees the freedom of religion, allowing individuals to freely practice, profess, and propagate their religion. Further, there are cultural and educational rights, which protect the interest of minorities and allow them to preserve the cultural and their culture and establish educational institution. Finally, one of the most powerful right is the right to constitutional remedies under Article 32. This allows individuals to directly approach the Supreme Court if their fundamental rights are violated. Dr. Ambedkar famously called this as the heart and soul of the Constitution. Now, let us understand how these rights have evolved through the years through several case laws. First, let's begin with A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras. The Supreme Court initially took a very narrow view of Article 21, holding that personal liberty could be restricted as long as there was a procedure which was established by law. However, the interpretation was significantly expanded in the landmark case of Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India. The court held that the procedure must be just, fair, and reasonable, thereby introducing a concept of due process into Indian constitutional law. Another important judgment is Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court struck down Section 66A of the Information Technology Act for violating freedom of speech and expression under Article 19. Now, a very important question to ask and something that you can reflect on is this: is freedom absolute? The answer is no. Fundamental rights, especially right to freedom, are subject to reasonable restrictions in the interest of public order, morality, sovereignty, and security of the state. Understanding the balance between rights and restrictions is the key to understanding how the Constitution functions in practice. Let's move on to the directive principle of state policy, often referred to as DPSPs. They are contained in Article 36 to 51 of the Constitution. Unlike the fundamental rights, directive principles are non-justiciable, which means they cannot be enforced in a court of law. In other words, if the state fails to implement them, an individual cannot directly approach the court for this enforcement. However, this does not mean that they are not important. In fact, they are fundamental in governance of the country. Directive principles often act as a guiding principle for the state while making laws and policies. They aim to establish a welfare state where social and economic justice is ensured to every single citizen. They include objectives such as reducing inequality, promoting education, ensuring fair distribution of resources, protecting the environment, and securing a just and a human workplace environment. Now, an important constitutional question has often arisen. What happens when the directive principles come in conflict with the fundamental rights? This issue is something that was addressed in the landmark case of Minerva Mills versus Union of India. In this case, the Supreme Court held that there must be a balance between fundamental rights and directive principles, and that this balance is itself a part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So neither can be given absolute supremacy over the other. Fundamental rights ensure individual liberty, while directive principles, they ensure social and economic justice. Together, they both create a balanced and inclusive constitutional framework. Let's briefly discuss about fundamental duties. Fundamental duties are provided under Article 51A of the Constitution. Now, they were added by the 42nd Amendment in 1976 at a time when it was felt that the citizens should have certain responsibilities towards the nation, not just rights. These duties are essentially the moral obligation of the citizens. They include responsibilities such as respecting the Constitution and its ideals, upholding the sovereignty and integrity of India, promoting harmony and spirit of brotherhood, protecting the environment, safeguarding public property. Now, unlike fundamental rights, these duties are not directly enforceable by the courts. However, they still hold significant importance in constitutional interpretation. In case of Ames Students Union versus Ames, the Supreme Court observed that the fundamental duties can be used as a guiding tool when interpreting laws and constitutional provisions. So while they may not be something that's legally enforceable on their own, they play an important role in shaping responsible citizenship and supporting the overall constitutional framework. In simple terms, if fundamental rights empower citizens, fundamental duties remind us our responsibility towards the nation. Let us now understand the structure of government under the Constitution of India. The Constitution establishes three main organs of the state. First, the legislature, whose primary function is lawmaking. At the central level, this includes the parliament, and at the state level, the state legislature. The second, the executive, which is responsible for implementation of laws. This includes president, prime minister, council of minister, and administrative machinery. Third, the judiciary, which is entrusted with the role of interpreting laws and ensuring that they are in accordance with the constitution. Now, these three organs, on the basis of an important constitutional principle known as, they operate on a principle known as separation of powers. This means that each organ has its own distinct function and power, and one organ should not encroach or encroach upon the domain of another. This system helps in maintaining checks and balances and prevents concentration of power in any one authority. At the same time, the Indian Constitution does not follow a strict separation. Instead, it adopts a system of checks and balances, where each organ has certain control over the others. A significant case in the context is Indira Gandhi versus Rajnare. In this case, the Supreme Court reaffirmed the importance of judicial review, that even actions of legislature are subject to constitutional scrutiny. The judgment reinforced the idea that the judiciary plays a very crucial role in maintaining the balance of power and protecting the basic structure of the constitution. Let us now focus on the role of judiciary and concept of judicial review. In Supreme Court, in India, the Supreme Court is regarded as the guardian of the Constitution. It has the ultimate authority to interpret the Constitution and ensure that all laws and actions of the state are in compliance with it. One of the most important powers of the judiciary is the power of judicial review. The judicial review means that the courts have the authority to examine any law, policy, or executive action. And if it is found to be inconsistent with the constitution, the court can declare it unconstitutional and void. The concept of judicial review was first established in the landmark US case, Marbury versus Madison. Although this case is from the United States, its principle has significantly influenced the constitutional law across the world, including India. In this context, the judicial review has firmly recognized as a part of the Constitution's basic structure. This case was again, this was clearly affirmed in the case of L. Chandrakumar versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court held that the power of judicial review cannot be excluded even by the constitutional amendment. So in essence, judicial review acts as a powerful safeguard It ensures that the constitution remains supreme and the rights of citizens are effectively protected. Let's turn on to the amendment of the constitution. The procedure for amending the constitution is laid down under Article 368. One of the unique features of the Indian constitution is that it is neither completely rigid nor it is completely flexible. Instead, it's a combination of both. What does this mean? Some provisions of the constitution can be amended by a simple majority in the parliament, much like an ordinary law. However, more important provisions require special majority and in certain cases even ratification by half of the state's legislature. This is flexible yet structured approach that ensures the constitution can evolve while changing times, while still preserving its core values. Now, a very important development in this area came through the landmark case of Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala. In this case, the Supreme Court introduced the basic structure doctrine. The court held that while the parliament has the power to amend the constitution, it cannot alter or destroy its basic structure. This means that the fundamental features such as supremacy of the constitution, rule of law, separation of power and judicial review are beyond the amending power of the parliament. This doctrine acts as a crucial safeguard ensuring that the identity of constitution remains intact even as it evolves over time. Let's now briefly look at some of the most important amendments to the Constitution of India. One of the most significant amendment in the 42nd one of the most significant amendments is the 42nd Amendment of 1976, which is often known as the mini constitution. Now, this amendment brought wide-ranging changes. It strengthened the powers of the central government, added words like socialist, secular to the preamble, and also introduced the concept of fundamental duties under Article 51A. Now, next we have the 44th Amendment of 1978, which again enacted to correct some of the excess of the 42nd Amendment. It played a crucial role in restoring and protecting fundamental rights, particularly by safeguarding personal liberty and ensuring that certain rights cannot be easily suspended even during the emergency. Finally, the 73rd and 74th Amendment marked a major step towards decentralizing power. The 73rd Amendment introduced the system of Panchayat Raj in rural areas, while the 74th Amendment established municipal governance in urban areas. These amendments gave constitutional status to local self-government institutions and empowered people at the grassroots level to participate in the governance. Together, these amendments highlight how the Constitution continues to evolve in response to political, social, and administrative needs of the country. Let us discuss some important constitutional doctrines that have developed by the judiciary over a period of time. First is the basic structure doctrine. Now, this doctrine essentially means that while the parliament has got the power to amend the constitution, it cannot alter the fundamental identity or the core features. This includes principles like rule of law, judicial review, separation of powers, and secularism. Second, the doctrine of eclipse. This doctrine applies to all the laws that were in existence before the constitution came into force. If such a law is inconsistent with the fundamental rights, it does not become completely void. Instead, it becomes dormant or eclipsed to the extent of inconsistency and can become operative again if the inconsistency is removed. Third, the doctrine of severability. According to this doctrine, if a part of law is found to be unconstitutional, only that specific part is struck down and not the entire law, provided the remaining portion can function independently. Now, an important case that ties these three doctrines, particularly the scope of judicial review, is I.R. Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu. In this case, the Supreme Court had held that even laws placed under the ninth schedule of the Constitution are not beyond the scope of judicial review if they violate the basic structure of the Constitution. The judgment reinforced the supremacy of the Constitution and ensured that no law can escape constitutional scrutiny. So, these doctrines play a crucial role in maintaining constitutional balance and protecting the core values of the Constitution. To conclude, the Constitution of India is not just a static or a rigid document, it is a living document that continues to evolve with the changing needs of the society. It carefully maintains a balance between different competing interests. On one hand, it guarantees you fundamental rights to individual, and on the other hand, it emphasizes on fundamental duties to ensure responsible citizenship. Similarly, it very beautifully strikes a balance between individual liberty and social control, ensuring freedom is protected while maintaining order and stability in the society. Ultimately, the Constitution serves as the backbone of Indian democracy. It provides the framework within which the state functions and ensures that the power is exercised within the constitutional limit. It is not just a legal document, it is a vision for justice, equality, and dignity for every citizen. Thank you so much, and do subscribe to the channel for more such interesting videos.